Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to another weekly reading wrap-up. I feel like I've been in a rush in my last couple of wrap-ups. Sorry about that, but I have been quite busy on the weekends and haven't had as much time to be lengthy and in-depth as I usually am. Let's dive in. I read comics this week. I've discovered there are a lot of things on Hoopla that I really want to read. So I read volumes 2 and 3 of Fence, which is written by C.S. Pacat, and the artwork is by Johanna the Mad, which is a great name. This is a sports comic. It's about a teenage boy named Nicholas who really wants to fence. He gets an athletics scholarship to a boys' school where they have a great fencing team. He wants to be on that team. He wants to fence his rival, a boy named Seiji. And then when he gets to the school, guess who he's rooming with? The series so far has mainly concerned the tournament where all the students compete to find out who will make the fencing team, and Nicholas really needs to make the team so that he can remain at the school because he has an athletic scholarship. I don't know anything about fencing. I am not into sports. Why am I reading this? It's just different. Like sometimes my brain just wants to read something different and it's interesting, I guess. But in general, it's kind of a YA sports comic and I don't think there's anything super amazing about it. It's got decent writing, it's got very standard artwork. I do feel like there's a lot of blandness and vagueness in the background. Like you don't really get a good look at what the scenery is like, haven't gone into much depth with the characters either. There could be so much more built into this and it's just not there yet. The series is going to be extended. I have no idea how they thought this was only going to be 3 volumes. It needs another 3, but apparently it's not coming back until the end of 2020 or something, so gotta wait and we'll see if I'm still interested in it when volume 4 materializes. Then I read Die, Volume 1. This is written by Kieron Gillen and the artwork is by Stephanie Hans. I picked this up because of these two people's work on The Wicked and the Divine, which has been one of my long-standing favorite comics that I buy whenever it comes out and stuff. Gillen wrote The Wicked and the Divine, and Stephanie Hans did some of these special issues. Particularly, I think one of the last special issues, and I really liked her artwork in that. So I wondered what the two of them would cook up together in a different series. And Die is another comic where it really shouldn't work for me, and yet it does. It's all based on like D&D style gaming and like this whole fantasy world, portal world based on this sort of gaming, which I don't even know how to describe properly. Like, I don't even know what a D20 is, guys. Apparently the world looks like a D20. What is that? But I found myself very engaged with this series. It's about 6 teenagers who get sucked into a game and they can't get home. It's like a fantasy world where they have to fight their way, defeat the game master, and then get home. In the real world, they are missing for like 4 years, then they come back and they can't tell anybody what happened to them. 30 years later, it all happens again. And it is dark, it is troubling. All these characters are very traumatized, they're very scarred, and being back in this world is the worst thing that could ever happen to them all over again. Gillen's writing, kind of like with The Wicked and the Divine, he's very verbose, but it does take time for me to really understand what's happening, what the point is, all the world building. I figure it might take me another volume or 2 to really hit my stride with reading this and understanding the ins and outs of it, but I do enjoy that. And I really like Stephanie Hans's artwork. It doesn't seem to be very typical comic art to me. It has more of a painted look to it, and the color palette is very, once again, very dark, kind of has that depressing blood tinge look to it, and I love it. So this is one that, despite me not really understanding the gaming aspect of it, I will look forward to the next volume a lot. You may remember that a couple of weeks ago I read a collection of Sappho's translated poetry. I was very taken with the poetry, but really didn't like that particular collection and the way it was put together and formatted. So Kim recommended that I get If Not Winter, Fragments of Sappho, translated by Carson. I did get it, I did read it, and I really enjoyed it. The Portuguese translation that I read before was just a very small selection of what we have of Sappho's poetry. I think the more complete fragments, and they were translated almost as complete stanzas, complete thoughts, and in rhyme. And it really gives this impression of Sappho's poetry being relatively complete rather than super fragmentary in nature. While I was reading If Not Winter, it's just the way that it's put together. It is all of the fragments, even the very, very smallest ones. And you have the Greek on one side and then the English translation on the other. So you can kind of see the shape and the form of the Greek words, and then the English translation sometimes is a single word from a single fragment. None of this 4 lines of rhyming couplet type of things. Carson just has a much simpler translation, I think, more straightforward, and it was very different from the Portuguese translation, maybe not as pretty, but I just think that it got across the nature of the fragments. It really shows you how little of Sappho's poetry we have and how much interpretation and reconstruction has to go into doing a translation. And what there is seemed to me to be very beautiful. Even the ones which are almost like a Mad Libs of just a couple of words scattered down the page gives you this sort of hint of what we've lost, like where do those words come from? What was the fuller meaning? It's very sad in a way. I felt kind of melancholy reading page after page of just fragment, one word here, one word there. Made me think about how much of the past we will never be able to find again. It's gone forever. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I would recommend getting it if you are looking into Sappho's poetry. This is a complete collection up through what was known in the early 2000s, so it's pretty much everything at this point. Then I read The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This is translated by Snyder, I believe. And this is a book that started off really strong for me, and then I lost interest by the halfway point. It became very dull. There didn't seem to be a point to it, and it turned out to be more, I think, literary fiction than speculative fiction or science fiction, which is what I wanted it to be. If you read this book and approach it as literary fiction, I think it's a pretty good novel, kind of a meditation upon the importance of memory, how memories make us as people, and what happens when we lose our memories. If you approach it like science fiction, it's incredibly dissatisfying because there's zero explanation for anything, including the main premise of the novel, which is that these people living on kind of an isolated island have their memories of things and concepts taken away. Things are disappeared, and then all those things are destroyed, or if they can't be destroyed, they're kind of ignored and forgotten. People no longer have their memories of those things, of interacting with those things, and if they encounter them again, it evokes nothing in them. So it could be anything. It could be birds disappearing, novels, a part of your body, and there is no explanation in the story about whether the disappearances are intentional. Is this happening for a reason? Is somebody deciding what's to be disappeared? There's no explanation of how it actually happens either. Why do some people always forget when they're supposed to? Why are the memory police rounding up the people who can't forget, who don't forget? I don't know. So by the halfway point, I realized that there were going to be no answers, and I could kind of see the shape of things, where it was going to go. I wasn't surprised by anything in the last 50 or so pages, even though some important things happened. And then it was over, and I was like, well, that was hella depressing. So, like, I'm glad that I read it, because I need to read more translated works. Like, I need more of that in my life, and there were some interesting things about this. It just I don't know, I demand more explanation in the stories that I read, I think. And the last thing that I finished this week is Letters to Tiptree, edited by Alexandra Pierce and Alisa Krasnostein. This is a collection in 3 parts. There are letters, which are kind of essay-like letters directly addressed to James Tiptree Jr. or Alice Sheldon. Then there is reprinted correspondence between Tiptree and Ursula Le Guin and Tiptree and Johanna Russ. And then the final portion are like reprinted introductions to various texts by Tiptree. For example, one of them is an introduction that Le Guin wrote for one of Tiptree's collections. The letters portion of this was the weakest for me. I was buddy reading this with Andrea from Infinite Text, and she said that this letter portion felt like reading somebody's fan mail, and I agreed. Many of the letters expressed the same sentiments about Tiptree's legacy and influence on the letter writer, and I found it difficult to differentiate many of the letters from each other. A couple of them really stood out though. Those were the ones that seemed to really be talking about something different from the others, really seemed to be engaging with Tiptree's life in a slightly different way, or with specific examples of her work. But on the whole, that section was kind of difficult to really get into, and I'm going to blame some of that on the formatting and the way this was put together. You have dozens of letters all packed together at the beginning of this. There's no indication on the page, like in the running header, about who wrote this letter, and then you get to the end of one of them and it's just signed with somebody's name. It says Sylvia. Who is Sylvia? You don't know unless you flip to the table of contents and you see the full name listed there. I thought that was a really weird formatting choice. It was very confusing a lot of the time. My favorite part of this was the correspondence. I'm a huge Ursula Le Guin fan, as many of you know, so I really wanted to read her correspondence with Tiptree, and that was fascinating and heartbreaking. One of the letters included here is Tiptree's to Le Guin, talking about all the times that she had tried to commit suicide from when she was a child and the depression weighing on her at the time. And if you know the end of Alice Sheldon's story, you know where this is going. And, you know, in my pen pal days, I have been the recipient of some shocking letters that moved me to tears and sobbing. And it kind of wondered how people like Le Guin and Russ felt when they got a letter like that and had to craft a response to it. Like, what do you say to someone who is struggling so much with their identity and with their suicidal thoughts, and just, that is some heavy, heavy stuff. Alice Sheldon was in a lot of pain for a lot of her life, and I think that really started to come across in the correspondence section. I would love for there to be like a real full collection someday published of all of Tiptree's correspondence. She wrote a lot of correspondence with people in the field in the 70s and 80s, and I bet a lot of it is fascinating. And then the last portion, which is kind of the introductions and last tidbits and stuff, was also quite good. It really left me thinking I need to read more of Tiptree's work. I've really only read her best of collection, Her Smoke Grows Up Forever, but it is still possible to get your hands on copies of many of her other collections, and she wrote like 2 novels, and I've just never gone out and found them, and I really want to, because many more of those things were mentioned here, and I want to know what they were. I really enjoy Tiptree's fiction. It is very challenging, it is very dark, but she as a person was incredibly complex, and there's a reason why she has the legacy she does now, the good and the bad and all of that. So yeah, I just find all of this fascinating. If you're going to read Letters to Tiptree, I think you need to familiarize yourself with Tiptree, with her famous stories, and with the general stuff about her life. If you don't do that beforehand, a lot of the references in this won't make much sense. You won't really know what people are responding to. I think it's a good idea probably to read her biography by Julie Phillips before reading this. I did not, but I already know quite a bit about Tiptree as a person, and I'll be reading the Julie Phillips biography in November with Andrea as well. And that is it for this week. I have started so many books and I need to sit down and just finish some of them. It's like I have first chapter syndrome or something right now. But I am currently committed to getting my physical TBR down to 50 books by the end of October. Then I will meet that goal for this year. It is doable. I just need to read 10 or 11 of the books that I own over the next couple of weeks. And to kind of help me out with that, I am doing some weekly polls on my Patreon page where my Patreon supporters can vote for which of my physical books I will start next. I'm currently reading Consider Phlebas by Ian M. Banks. It's one of the culture novels, and it is the winner of the first poll. And once I get halfway through that book, I will put up the next one, I think. My reading pace hasn't been quite what I thought it would be this weekend because I've been busy. But anyway, that is it from me this week. Let me know if you have also read any of the things I've talked about today. Leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back to talk to you again very soon. And until then, bye.